Hello, literacy leaders and champions. Welcome to Literacy Talks, a podcast series from Reading Horizons, dedicated to exploring the ideas, trends, insights, and practical issues that will help us all improve our professional practice, knowledge, and confidence in teaching reading. Our host is Stacy Hurst, professor at Southern Utah University and chief academic advisor at Reading Horizons, where reading momentum begins. Joining Stacy are Donnell Pons, a recognized expert in literacy and special education, and Lindsay Kemeny, an author and Utah-based elementary classroom teacher. Our special guest is our very own Lindsay Kemeny, whose just published book, 7 Mighty Moves, research-backed classroom-tested strategies to ensure K-3 reading success, is receiving rave reviews. You'll hear why she wrote the book and share her personal, powerful connection to its content. It's a mighty moving episode, so let's get started.
Welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. My name is Stacy Hurst, and I'm the host, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Donnell Pons and Lindsay Kemeny. And today we have a very exciting episode. We've been looking forward to it for a long time. And I'm going to let Donnell, we're just going to turn the time over to you and let you introduce it, and we'll get right into it.
Thank you, Stacy. So I consider this episode one where we're all kind of sharing in the hosting duties. This is really going to be a conversation. And it's because we're introducing or talking about our co-host and dear friend, Lindsay Kemeny's book, and it's called 7 Mighty Moves. And it's been making a lot of traction, which is fantastic amongst folks who are online and also folks who are at conferences. And it's really good to be hearing people talking about it. And Lindsay, I think today there are lots of ways we can approach talking about a book. And we talk about articles and books all the time on the podcast. And one of the things we want to be really aware of is the fact that we don't want to give away too much, because we would really like everybody to purchase the book. It's fantastic and it would be well worth it to have it there so you can keep referring to it and thumbing through it. And I love that, Lindsay, you also kept it so that it is very approachable. That's what I love about it too. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I'm going to have to slog through it, you don't. It's not a slog. It's a very easy, approachable read, which is fantastic, again, for teachers. And so all of those things, we want to encourage you to think about buying a copy and going through it. So we're not going to want to get into the details too much. We're not going to ask Lindsay to read passages and that kind of thing, because we're hoping to encourage folks to entice them to learn more. But really today it's about, because we have Lindsay and Lindsay's part of our community and you get to hear from her all the time, we're going to get that kind of background story as to how 7 Mighty Moves came to be. And so I think that'll be interesting. And then kind of that writing process, because there's been a lot of folks in the reading world with books. And how does this one step apart from those? What are things that Lindsay learned in trying to approach other books and thought, well, maybe if I have a chance, I might do this differently. That'll be part of the conversation too. But first, let's start off with what made Lindsay think she could write this book and why she should write this book, because I think that's important with your background. So Lindsay, take that away.
All right. Well, there's a couple different directions I could go here, Donnell. So let me start back first. What happened maybe 7 years ago, 7 years ago, is my son was struggling to learn how to read. And I was doing all the things I had been taught, everything I'd been taught in college, my early years of teaching, and nothing was working. And I was really confused, embarrassed, because I was a teacher and I couldn't help my own son learn how to read. I didn't understand why it was so difficult for him. And at the end of second grade, we finally went and did some outside testing where we found out that he has dyslexia, also dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So that is really what started me on this journey, which leads into why I wrote the book, right? Because I had to find out, well, what do students with dyslexia need to learn to read? What does everyone need to learn to read? What happens in the brain when we learn to read? And so it was just like this snowball effect. I kept learning and learning, and I became really upset because I found out that some of the things I had been taught in college and my early years of teaching were not aligned with research. And that same year, it was when my son was diagnosed, was my first year teaching kindergarten. that was another kind of thing going on because I had taught second grade before. And so I was doing the same things I had done when I taught second grade with the kindergartners. And that's where I started to grow uneasy with some of the things I had been taught. So I'm bringing them to my table. Oh, we're going to read. I'm so excited. But the books that were provided to me were those leveled, predictable, repetitive texts. And I grew so frustrated because I wanted my students to apply their letter sound knowledge that I had been teaching them. But now I had to say, oh, this word you can't sound out. Look at the picture. Does it give you a clue? Which is what I had been taught over and over and over. And I never questioned it until that moment teaching kindergarten. And I was like, wait a second, this is giving my students the wrong idea of what reading is. So I just have to start there because that's kind of where it all started. And it was this gradual learning process. And I had to make some major changes, both as I was helping my son and in my classroom, because everything I was learning, I would apply it with my son and I would apply it in the classroom. And suddenly my students were doing so much better. I had so much more clarity. I knew how to take a student who was struggling with reading, and I knew how to dive deeper, see what they need, and help them, as well as just providing that tier 1 instruction in the first place. That is what my book is about. And so does that answer your question, Donnell? And then do you want me to go into like first writing the book?
Yeah. And first of all, I want to bring Stacy. So at this juncture, Lindsay, you've provided some really interesting information. Love hearing that background. And it'll be really important when you read the book at the beginning, because Lindsay does a lot of really good setup for that understanding. So that'll be interesting for listeners when they do purchase the book. They'll go, oh, that's really interesting to hear Lindsay talk about that. But Stacy, I'd like to bring you in at this juncture, because what we're hoping to do with you in the position that you are teaching in a university setting, we want your students to pick up Lindsay's book and not have to have the introduction of, this is how I was taught. Please don't do this. This is why you do it differently. So tell us about that with your students, Stacy.
Yeah. And, I was thinking, as I read the book, that my students definitely, when they get to the methods part of our instruction for reading, would benefit from knowing what's happening in an effective teacher's classroom. And I think that's a really good lens into that. The other thing that I think the readers need to be aware of, Lindsay has many years. Lindsay, I'm talking about you like you're not here. Lindsay, you have a lot of years of teaching experience. I love that you share, which I'm sharing with my teachers, the research and then how it looks in practice. And I think for my pre-service teachers, that's the most critical thing, because I don't want them to dismiss either one. And so that's what I think is one of the really valuable things about Lindsay's book.
So Lindsay, take us to that writing process.
Well, and let me just piggyback off, Stacy, what you're saying, because I feel like that's what I really wanted to do with the book. I wanted to make it really easy to understand and really from the teacher perspective. Like, yes, I'm a current teacher. I'm in my classroom. And, have you guys seen that graphic where it's like a pit and someone's at the bottom of the pit and there's people at the top kind of shouting down, trying to help them to get out of the pit? Okay. So I think about this because I feel like, there's so many amazing experts out there and I love listening to them, but a teacher, I love also listening to teachers. And I feel like the teacher, like when you're in that pit and you can hear all these expert voices about what to do, the teacher is like, hang on, I'm coming down there. I've been right down there before and I'm coming down. I'm going to tell you and help you get out of that. And I kind of like, that's what I was thinking about when I want you to know, like, hey, I know I've done this. I made these mistakes. Here's what's working in my classroom. Here's what I do. And here's my favorite ways to apply this stuff. Okay, so I started a blog several years ago after my son was diagnosed. I started a blog because I was really passionate about literacy, and passionate about the things that I was teaching and learning. And part of that, and I'm not going to go into it right now, but part of that is because if you've heard me speak, I've talked about my son also had depression, and I just saw, what the struggle to read did to him and also how it helped him. And I've talked about that a little bit before. So that's why I'm so passionate. So I started this blog. I wanted to share with everyone what I was learning. I just was like, every teacher deserves to know this stuff. Every student deserves a teacher who knows this stuff. And it's not a huge blog. I'm not a huge blogger because I am a teacher. And so it's just something I do when I have time. But people started sharing it, and they shared it on Twitter a lot. And in May of last year, I got an email from the editorial director of Scholastic, and they had read my blog. And so somehow they had seen it, and I imagine someone had shared it on Twitter and they had seen it, and they had read through it, and then they reached out to me to see if I was interested in writing a book. Well, I thought it might be a scam or something at first. I'm like, what is this? Is this true? Is this real? Plus it was May, and May as a teacher is such a crazy time. So I was like, I can't even think about this. I don't have time for anything. I don't know if it's even a real email. And it took me a few weeks to email her back. And it was, school was out, and I was thinking about it. Maybe they really did read my blog. And I reached out, and we had a meeting. It wasn't a scam. And we had a great meeting, and they invited me to write a book proposal. And I just remember I had all these feelings, like, I don't know, it's just scary, I guess. And can I write a book? I don't know if I can write a book, but then, oh my goodness, I really want to write a book because I'm so passionate about this stuff. And I've seen the difference in my son and in my class, and maybe it would be really helpful. So, okay, I agreed to write a book proposal, which there's a lot that goes into that, and you have to have a sample chapter. And so I wrote that, and I gave it back to Scholastic maybe in July. And then it had to go through several levels of the company. So there would be cuts, maybe, so to speak. So if it was a no, we were done. If it was a yes with that group, it would go to the next group, and they would read the proposal. And so meanwhile, it's summer, and I'm a teacher, so I just continued to write. And I just thought, if they pass and they say no, I'll just try to find another publisher. So I just kept writing. That summer was the first draft. And then in October is when I got the yes from Scholastic. So
I have a quick question on the sample chapter. Which one was it? Was it just the first chapter, or
no, it wasn't the first chapter. I think it was my chapter on decodables. So I didn't actually write the chapters in order of how they are. And that was part of the process, I guess, because I would give them a table of contents, and my table of contents were kind of a little weird at first because it was a different order. And I started with the chapter on 3Qing. That was my first one, because to me, I'm like, this is so important. One of the biggest differences in what I did. But they kind of helped me reorder and for it to make more sense. And I feel like that was so good. And that was something else I learned through the process, was just to value the feedback and taking feedback and just making the writing even better.
So with that, Lindsay, I'm going to ask you, was it always 7? How'd you land on 7?
Yes, it was always 7. Because
okay.
If you look at my blog, I actually have a blog post I wrote several years ago, and it's called, all right, it's a little negative. I don't know if I should share it. It's a little dramatic. It was 7 deadly hours of teaching reading.
Yeah.
And so the book, I kind of took those, and then I reordered them, and I really focused more on what the change was. What's the move I did versus what was the mistake I was making before. And they're all the mistakes, what I was doing before, right? And then how I changed.
Which I really love. I think that's one of my favorite things in there is that aspect of it, that viewpoint. I think is fantastic for teachers. Yeah. What's interesting, Lindsay, how do you separate the emotion? Because there's a lot of emotion. You've talked a little bit about the fact that this was in your home. This is very personal. And for me, that's kind of one of the hard parts, is separating the emotion from giving people the stuff.
Yeah, well, and I feel like I share a little more of the emotion maybe in my conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I come about this a couple different ways. I come about this from the view of a parent and the view of a teacher. And I can really understand and empathize with both sides. I understand those parents who are so upset and angry that their child isn't getting what they need. I can understand the teacher side where it's like, I was never taught this. Why wasn't I taught this? Or even the initial what do you mean? I thought that was the best way to teach reading. What do you mean that was wrong? I was taught that. Like, there's so many emotions involved in all of it. I don't blame the teacher, because I was there. And so that's what I try to show that in the book. Like, I was surprised. Guess what? I was surprised to hear about this. And I wanted the book to be really conversational and just like you're talking to your teacher friend down the hall, keep it there. So, yeah.
Educators, families, policymakers, and our communities at large are all focused on coming together to help all children develop reading proficiency. That's why you'll want to learn more about the new Reading Horizons Discovery. It's the evidence-based foundational literacy program educators asked for and educators helped create. With innovative technology to support teachers and students, a complete collection of decodable books, a digital sound wall, real-time coaching, and more, Reading Horizons Discovery gives you everything you need to help all K-3 students become proficient readers. So, take off with a trusted science of reading aligned approach. Stay on top of student progress and individual needs with a tech-enabled tool and streamlined student data. And then take action to transform reading challenges into literacy success. Go to readinghorizons.com/product guide to download a complete program overview today.
Stacy, I kind of want to ask you too, because oftentimes when we're at conferences, and this came up, we were at a conference recently, and there are teachers who stand up and share. And I remember I leaned to you and kind of mentioned, this is not the first time we've heard this. When a teacher will share, I have a child. I'm the parent of a child who is now, and usually they're in their 20s, and this is the sadness. And that child of mine never learned to read. And I'm in classrooms now teaching, and there are lots of tears, and we've remarked on this. So I think this is interesting, this theme of separating the emotion from getting the work done. And Stacy, what are your thoughts on that too? It's very interesting, isn't it?
It is, because as an educator, I've gone through all those emotions too. And that's being an educator that doesn't have a child who struggles with dyslexia. But I think always there are a lot of emotions that are expressed. Sometimes it's anger. And I would say that's probably the one that I feel the most often these days. I mean, I've been through all of it, but now I'm at the point where I'm frustrated. Like, we have had this information for so long, and yet it's taken so long to get into practice. And I think that's one really hopeful thing about books like Lindsay's book and others like that it really doesn't spend too much time in the emotion. It's like, okay, let's be solution-based and fix this, and this is what works. I also love the emotion. Lindsay, you brought it up, having your writing reviewed, no matter how it is. I remember as a first grade teacher, just watching my first graders share their writing and be so proud and happy to do it. And yet as an adult, I don't feel that way. I write plenty. How often I share it is a whole other story. So I love that. I also love that you acknowledge what you tried before that didn't work. And that's not on you. That a lot of that is what we were taught, right? But you're nodding to the fact that as we learn and grow, it's messy. And sometimes when we get feedback, we don't love it, but it's all in the name of making us better. And we can't be afraid of that, right? We can't be afraid. We've got to deal with the emotion for sure, and yet apply it in very positive and productive ways.
Yeah. And I just grew to really love and appreciate the whole process and getting the feedback. And so, as I had mentioned before, it was the end of October when it was, a yes with Scholastic and we're going to move forward. And so then I would revise. I first revised every chapter, and then I would send it to my editor, and my editor would give me feedback, and then I would revise again. And I loved it. And, it went from being like, what do you mean that's not clear? Or I need another example, or that's redundant? What, as I made the changes, seeing, oh, yes, okay, I see what he was saying. This makes it more clear, or this makes the paragraph so much stronger. And so it was just, I was excited all the time to get his feedback, and I knew it would make the writing better. And after my editor had gone through everything, and he really was the best. Like, it was just it's so great to have such a good relationship, with someone, a good working relationship. Then I reached out to experts in the field that I'm like, I wanted them to review a draft chapter and help me make sure, is this aligned with research? Am I stating this accurately? Because I'm a teacher, I'm not a researcher. And, this is in a science of reading line, Scholastic science of reading line. That's like a lot of pressure. I want it to be accurate. And I want to be clear when something I do is there's not research about it yet. Then I want to be clear about that. And then I want to be clear about the research and make sure I'm interpreting it, correctly so it can withstand criticism. And so that was kind of my goal as I reached out to different people to read draft chapters, because I'm like, I want to hear the criticism now, not when it's published. So anyway, that was really important to me. And I just loved that. And I feel like the support I got was so great.
I love hearing that, Lindsay, because that's not easy to do. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of folks listening saying, you had to send it to, well, who read that? That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speak to that a little bit, because they were really supportive.
They were. And it was so great. And because sometimes it was like, oh, is there a better study for this? Okay, what study, what's a better study to show this? Or here's this study. And like I said, I wanted it to be accurate. And they were so gracious with their time. I mean, Stephanie Stoller reviewed a chapter and then she went on to review a second chapter. I'm like, oh my goodness, thank you so much. And I'm just everyone, I don't know, I feel so indebted to all of them, for giving me their time and everything. So.
But I love hearing that at this particular juncture when more than ever we need to come together, right?
Yeah, and I do. And I feel like they were all behind me and it was great. And Pam Kastner read the entire draft, all the chapters, and I'm like, thank you. And then Dr. Anita Archer, she wrote the foreword. And I was so nervous about that. I mean, she's one that makes everyone, I think, sit up a little straighter in their seat. And she had printed out the whole thing, had read through it. And it was so amazing to have her support.
Yeah, that's so great. Stacey, you jump in anytime, because I don't want to be taken up all the time, but make sure that Stacey jumps in with any questions that she's got or something to offer.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, I actually asked a colleague today who I know is very thorough and direct in his feedback. I asked him to review an academic piece of writing that I wrote in the same spirit, right? Like, and this is the other thing that I appreciate about that example, Lindsay, because even with something like ChatGPT that could do the majority of the writing for us, we still need to be critical, right? We still need to look through it and say, this is accurate, this isn't. So you weren't dismissing that either. I mean, you were definitely having your voice, and I'm sure there were some things that people requested you change that you didn't, and maybe you want to talk about that. But I also think just that camaraderie and that we are all in this together. I love that you reached out, but I also love that the people who reviewed it had that in mind. Like, this is going to be a contribution. And it was a community that came together.
Yeah, it was great.
So to what Stacey said, was there anything, Lindsay, that you held on tightly and said, no, this has got to stay? Was there anything that you let go that now you're thinking, oh, I wish that had been in there? Or are you pretty darn happy with everything that came out?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. There wasn't anything, well, there was really nothing huge that people were like, oh, you absolutely, but there were little changes. I think there was one phrase I remember, Dr. Matt Burns in the fluency chapter was like, well, you can't say that because we don't have a specific study for that. And I was like, oh, and that was just like a learning experience, but there's nothing I feel like I really dug in my heels about. I mean, there were maybe things that, which I can't think of anything specific, but there might have things that people said, well, you could consider putting this in, or you could, this. And it was hard because we had to keep it to exactly 160 pages. So I think that was a frustration because there were things that we had to take out, not like a whole move, but there was just within each chapter, like there wasn't space to put in that example but some of it, as I said, could really see the benefit of being very succinct with my words, because that helps it be more readable and really clear. And I can't go on a tangent in the book because there's not space for that. So anyway, I don't think there's anything really huge that I wish I had done differently.
I'm wondering what advice you would have for someone who wants to write a similar kind of book.
Well, I think be open to feedback would be the main thing. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm a huge writing expert or anything, but I think probably one of the most important parts is just revise. And even it was at first, because my first draft chapters didn't have all the same format. And it was really like, I wrote it in the summer and I had to go back in November and, okay, we need some continuity between these chapters. And that's when we decided, okay, well, we're going to have like the kind of research section and then the classroom implications section. And then my favorite is the strategies for success in every chapter, which are just, my favorite ways to do those things in the classroom.
So that's what I was going to ask you, Lindsay. You've had an opportunity to get some feedback. You've been on different podcasts talking about the book. How have you seen different places utilizing the book, if you have, and maybe share some of those recommendations? And then also, how has it made things different for you in your setting where you're teaching, if it has at all?
Well, you know what? It's so scary putting this out in the world, like really. And you guys know, because I've told you guys over and over because you're my friends. And I've mentioned it to other people too, where I'm like, this is scary because I'm really putting myself out there. And for the whole world, you could just criticize me. And you see that. You're like, I put my heart and soul into a book. And then, someone could just say some like, oh, yeah, that's just really whatever, whatever they might say. And that's crushing when you put so much work into it. So I feel so fortunate and so grateful because so many people have reached out to me to let me know how much they appreciate it and loved it. And when all those Amazon reviews started coming in, and I was scared because I'm like, I don't even want to look on Amazon. And then I looked and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's all these nice things. Thank you. And it was the same thing in our Science of Reading Facebook group where I saw someone had asked for opinions on my book. And I'm like, I'm not even going to look at this because I'm scared. And then later it was Anna Geiger who tagged me. She's like, come and look. And then I saw, and everyone had said all these nice things. And then just the messages I've been getting. So I think it's still really early. So I don't know how well it's being applied. I've had lots of, people reach out to thank me. I've had, districts that want me to come and, speak to their teachers, which is so fun. I had a principal that's like, I don't even know if we have the money, but I'm going to purchase it with my own money for my teachers. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so it's fun. I just really hope it makes a difference. And I really hope it positively impacts teachers and their students, because that's my overall goal, right? Is to have more proficient readers and more teachers comfortable and confident and have more clarity in teaching literacy.
I love that, Lindsay. And I am sure you are going to have a lot of stories to tell over the course of this coming year and beyond, which I think is fantastic. And I also love what you were saying about, because I think you touched on a lot of universal things, I think, for us as educators. And there's that fear that when you step out in your space to say something, what the reaction might be. So I think that is universal. And I loved hearing all those ways in which that was a challenge for you. You had to push through. And then I also think it was interesting that you mentioned I expected that things might be more negative. However, I was really surprised and felt great when people were so supportive. And I think that is more of what we generally experience, right? Is that folks really do want to help and we do want to lift each other up in this space. I think that's great. Yeah. Those universal themes.
Well, and then another thing with the book is there's no stock images. It's all pictures from my classroom. Plus there's QR codes. Okay, this adds like another level of scary, right? Because there's these QR codes that go to me teaching in the classroom. It's all very authentic. And it's just, I'm not perfect. So this is another way that I was like, people could really criticize me. But guess what? When you see it and you see another teacher, you learn, and it's a learning and growing experience. And even I learned from Dr. Anita Archer, because I was taking a training from her, and she showed these videos of her teaching, and she would point out things that she did wrong in those videos, or things that, oh, look, I could have done better with this. And that really had an effect on me. I'm like, wow. And that's also what I've thought with the videos. I can put myself out there, and maybe I might say something wrong or whatever, but it can be a learning, growing experience for everyone. Whether you see wonderful things or you see a mistake, it can be a learning process. So, and that was really kind of fun, because literally I did not have cameramen in my classroom. And some people were surprised to hear that. It's literally, I would take my cell phone, and I had a tripod, and I would push record, go around to the front, teach the lesson, go back, push stop, and then I would send that to Scholastic, and then they could edit, trim, me going over to the camera or whatever. So it's kind of fun, because it's real life. It's just my classroom.
Lindsay, you and your trusty cell phone. Stacy and I have teased you, but that cell phone of yours, it does a lot. It's pretty awesome.
We have, for the listeners out there, we have this ongoing rivalry, because I use Android, and I'm very I know it's not the popular thing. I have a Google Pixel. And then Stacy and Donnell have their Apple phones. And so I made sure to tell them when I was like, oh, they're wanting to know what I used to take the pictures and what I used to do the videos. And I'm like, it's just my phone. It's a good one.
I mean, to be fair, it is really inconvenient for me, because I can't type and text both of you on my laptop. I have to text you on my phone. So Google Pixel, if you're listening, it's just that one thing. That's it.
I cause all the problems in our
trio.
So I had to point out, literally, I couldn't wait to tell Stacy and Donnell because Scholastic was just saying, oh, these look so great. What were you using? Can you give us some tips, to share with others when they take pictures? Because the pictures with my cell phone too. In fact, some of the pictures my daughter took, was in 4th grade. And I'm like, come in at recess, and I just have it all set up. You just need to click, this button.
I love that. And, Lindsay, I love your part about it's messy. And that's the part for your students as well, right? We're going to learn as we maybe don't do that exactly right. We'll learn from that experience. And I love you sharing that and reminding us. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Lindsay. I know that we're going to have other opportunities to discuss, so we will. But this has been so fun just to have a little bit of background and to get us started. And I know teachers are deep in the school year, but I promise you that this is very approachable. So even if you hadn't heard about the book and you're thinking, oh, but my classes have already started, I don't know, I really do encourage you, because it is something you could pick up and just do a quick, and I think you'll be really surprised. You'll get started with it, and I think you'll be pulled right in and say, I think this is something I can do. It's quite doable. So I do encourage you, if you haven't had a chance, that it's not too late. If you think, oh, I'm already deep in the year, think about it.
That's one of my favorite things about it, because we've had a lot of conversations on this podcast about hero worship and the pitfalls of that. And this is not that, right? This is you being vulnerable, but you also sharing your expertise. And I think one of the best things about it is that anybody can read it, like Donnell said, and feel like, okay, I can do this too. You're not trying to put yourself above anyone else. You're just saying, hey, I'm a teacher like you in the trenches, and this is what I've learned. So I look forward to more from you and from teachers, other teachers who are in the classroom sharing. And I think collaboratively, we can do a lot as a community and to bridge that research to practice gap that we have experienced for so long in education. So really, Lindsay, in that way, your book is a catalyst, I think, for that. So thank you. Donnell, anything else? Lindsay, any parting words?
No, I'll just say, please make sure to read the conclusion. It's probably my favorite part. And, sometimes I've said at the end of the book, someone might skip that, but it's really kind of the piece that is the most special to me. And just thank you. And you can continue to reach out to me, because I love those nice messages. Helps me keep going and keep my nerves at bay a little bit. And thank you, everyone. It's just exciting.
Thank you, Lindsay. Donnell and I were able to throw Lindsay a book launch party, book launch And we had that conversation right up to the night before. You were like, what part should I read out loud? And I read the whole book in a night. It was that enthralling and good. And I didn't fall asleep. And it was the last thing I did before I went to sleep. But it was so good. But I remember when I got to that conclusion, I think I might have even texted you right then. I don't remember, but maybe not, because it was like 2:00 in the morning. But I remember being like, that's it. That's what you need to share, because it is really powerful. So I agree. Don't skip that. And thank you, Donnell, for this conversation. For those of you who are part of our collective, if you haven't already received an invitation this month, our live will be about Lindsay's book, and we'll be sharing some more information, and you'll be able to ask Lindsay questions yourself. So we're looking forward to that. Please join us. If you're not part of the collective, we'd love to have you. It's a community, right? We love it. So we'd love to see your face in that Zoom chat as well. Again, thanks for the great conversation. Lindsay, thanks for the time that you took to share with us your expertise in practice and knowledge. And those of you who've been joining us, thank you so much. And we will see you on the next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today for Literacy Talks, the podcast series for literacy leaders and champions everywhere. We invite you to join the Science of Reading Collective, our free community and resource hub, so you can stay current with new ideas, free webinars, resources, and more. And be sure to visit Literacy Talks online for resources, access to every season's episodes, and more at readinghorizons.com/literacy talks. It's an exciting time to teach reading and ensure your students reach grade level proficiency this school year. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where reading momentum begins. Join us next time.